You mentioned that here here's a kind of literary mapping of the world that goes alongside the cartographic mapping of the world. Let's talk a little bit about how he actually does that. Since this is a somewhat new task, Homer goes off in these untraceable fantasy worlds. Here, the task is an actual mapping of the world that claims to be accurate in one way or another. How does he proceed?
It's very interesting. He starts like Homer. He plunges in medias res, and the middle he starts in is pretty much the first place Da Gama gets that no European had been before. So he's going to start with the mapping the southern coast of Africa, Indian Ocean, and then across, and then Asia. And it's very much like a Portolan chart. It's really the landfalls, the ports that they come to. And the epic ends with this huge, wonderful panorama of all the places in Asia that he knows. These are the names. And one of the things that's interesting, he set this epic about 75 years before his own time. This is when his relative Vasco da Gama had these explorations of 1497-99, just 5 years after Columbus made his first voyage. Columbus is still making his voyages to the New World. But he's also infusing his own contemporary experience. Some things he describes are really just what he saw, not what Vasco da Gama saw, who was supposed to be the one narrating the story of the waterspout and all. And I think the mapping then becomes not only geographic, which is quite a bit of, but also ethnographic. A lot of interest in different peoples he encounters. And you see, it's so fascinating that the first attempts of a European to really deal with radical cultural multiplicity on a global scale. And I'm wondering to you, reading this, is this like an embarrassment, a difficulty, a challenge, a fascination? How do we deal with this kind of, very early attempt to deal with racial difference, not always in a very positive way?
I think it's all the things you mentioned. It's very schematic, but it makes sense that it would be schematic. You encounter something radically new, you try to reduce it in some way, make it understandable. It seems to me that there are two kinds of people that they encounter. On the one hand, natives, and they treat them in one or two ways, but then also Muslims. And that, I think, really brings to the fore the kind of religious rivalry that these Europeans have between Christianity and Islam. And it's interesting that in most places, Islam is not seen as a kind of local religion, but it is itself an empire or part of a trading empire. So in these encounters with Islam, you have one emerging Christian empire encountering a Muslim empire.
Which is an expansive empire, and there's all these struggles going on in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially how much of Europe will the Ottomans take over. And I think he has a somewhat uneasy sense that also already Homer had, that some of these barbarians out east are more civilized than we are.
In the encounter with the non-Muslim natives, it's fascinating to see, especially in India, how sometimes the presumption is that they might be Christian. So it's almost as if these were Muslim and Christian are the only options, or at least one of the primary default positions.
And it's not entirely clear whether they're speaking of the god Krishna or Christ. That seems to kind of get conflated a little bit at certain moments. Also interesting are the Africans he meets in the southern part of Africa, black Africans. And you really have two types there too. There are good Africans and bad Africans. And the good ones bring you dinner, and the bad ones are cannibals, and they think you're the dinner. It's very striking kind of dichotomy between the good and the bad.
There's this question, are they helpful, are they not? Do they bring you food or not? But they're also important navigators, They rely on local knowledge to get them into the Indian Ocean, actually.
Particularly interested in Swahili. So also as the linguistic mapping, what do they speak? He's aware that Swahili has all this Arabic mixed in with stuff they can't understand. So one of his shipmates speaks Arabic and kind of get along, the kind of a pidgin Arabic with Swahili speakers. But it's his traders around the Indian Ocean for whom Swahili is a kind of a lingua franca that really guide him.